What is up, guys? Welcome back to CageChat MMA. We're here, of course, to talk about what happened last weekend, and of course, talk about PFL, which takes place tomorrow. We'll have the preview for that, as we haven't got any UFC this weekend. It's straight to Madison Square Garden with the PFL World Championships. But before that, let's reflect on what happened last weekend. Now, the last video we done was a preview on Derek Lewis versus Sergey Spivak, of course, and that fight never took place. It was, of course, on the main card. Prior to the main card, in fact, there was some rumblings going on about Derek Lewis not feeling well, about potentially this fight not being able to go ahead. And we got to the main card, still didn't know, but of course there was the official announcement at the start of the main card to say that Derek Lewis had been ill and unable to compete. And that Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Ion Cutelaba will now be the main event, obviously a 3-round main event. I believe the last one we had was Israel Adesanya versus Anderson Silva. I can't remember a 3-round main event prior to that, or following, well, definitely following that. Prior to Saturday night. And it left a bit of a sour taste because obviously it wasn't the best card on paper. It did have this moment, so we'll talk about those. But the heavyweight type, with heavyweights, you can have a bit of a lackluster card, especially in the Apex. You have a bit of a lackluster card because you're expecting a heavyweight knockout or a viral moment to go ahead in that heavyweight contest, especially when Derek Lewis is in the cage. He's either going to get the finish or get finished. At the moment in this stage of his career, and obviously that was something it was the icing on the cake of that card, and we got that taken away from us, and certainly so did Sergey Spivak, who of course I believe was going into his first main event in the UFC Apex against a former title contender in, of course, Derek Lewis, and he lost out on his moment, and he's going to have that rescheduled. When, I don't know, if they can fit it on a maybe not 282 because that card's too close and certainly full. But maybe having lost Yeri and Glover, maybe they can stick Derek Lewis in there and Sergey Spivak in there as a little bit of main card extra now. Shall we see? We shall see on that one, of course. But Saturday night, again, it was okay. It was bubbling away. And of course, Kennedy Nzechukwu got a fantastic win against, of course, Ion Cutelaba, getting that TKO in the second round with a vicious knee. He and his team had developed that sort of, they withstood the first round, sort of downloaded what Ion Cutelaba done, let him get tired, and then in the second round they read his takedown attempts beautifully, and got the knee in, and he certainly got to finish 30 seconds after that. And it's a good win for him, a big win for him. Of course, he's now on a 2-fight win streak with wins over Carl Robertson and Ion Cutelaba, 2 finishes as well. So that boosted him up, maybe not into the light heavyweight rankings, but certainly up that towards that path going into the UFC light heavyweight rankings, and certainly going into next year on a positive. And Ion Cutelaba, I feel not sorry for, but it was only 2 years ago he was facing Nurmagomedov Ankalaev. Now, of course, Ankalaev is now fighting for the vacant light heavyweight title. So it shows you how devastating this game can be within the space of 24 months. Obviously, he lost to Nurmagomedov Ankalaev. He then drew to Dustin Jacoby and beat Devin Clark. But he's now on a 3-fight loss record, and of course, he's been finished in each of those fights. So he's really, dropped down the pecking order. I think he's even dropped out the top 15 of the rankings as well. There was a moment where he was in that 13th, 14th spot with Nurmagomedov Ankalaev, Johnny Walker, Paul Craig, and those sort of names. So it's interesting to see what happens next to him and whether he's, looking at being on the chopping block. He's a very fun fighter to watch, and he's good when it comes to the weigh-ins with the Hulk moniker that he has. And again, he is an exciting fight most of the time, whether he's on the winning side or the losing side. But he's a 16-9-1. He's only won one in his last 7, in fact. One in the last 7. 5 losses, 1 draw, 1 win. So he's really slipped under the radar, and slipped out of that 205-pound division, of course. Now, when you got like Dustin Jacoby, you got Jimmy Crute, and then you got Khalil Roundtree, who he has a win over. In fact, Khalil Roundtree's top 13. Dominic Reyes is up there, and Kennedy Nzechukwu is someone I'd like to see against Dominic Reyes, basically because of what the sort of record of Dominic Reyes and the perception of Dominic Reyes at the moment. I would enjoy that fight But because knowing it is Dominic Reyes and what Dominic Reyes has, been through, I wouldn't like to see him back in the cage so soon after what happened in his most recent fight. Of course, he's been knocked out on 3 occasions now, or finished on 3 occasions at least. 2 of those vicious knockouts, one against Ryan Spann and the other, of course, against Yuri Prohaska. And of course, he did take a lot of damage against Yan, let's not forget. So that would be the ballpark I'd be in for Kennedy Nzechukwu. Of course, Khalil Roundtree would be a fantastic fighter for him. I'd be down for that all day long. Maybe that is the fight to make, in fact. Or Jimmy Crute, in fact. I'll take either of those. For Ion Cutelaba, it's difficult to know where he is. I think he's in a bit of trouble, and I don't know. We never like to see those tweets about the fighter removed, but I think he might have one more chance, maybe 2 more chances, based on what he's given the company already. But they're a vicious company, and he's certainly putting himself in a position where he can be cut. But he is only 28 years of age, so he's still got some time ahead of him. He could certainly go to a Bellator or a PFL and do very well, rebuild himself up as well. It looked like maybe, I don't think it was a lack of camp, but of course he has got good striking, but of course he's trying to use that striking to try and get in and get takedowns and then finish on the ground. So maybe he just needs to remove himself for a year or 2, maybe change camps, maybe learn or develop his game a little bit stronger, because he did come predictable on Saturday night with his takedown attempts. So maybe that's just something he's got to work on personally to develop. Of course, prior to that we had Waldo Cortez Acosta versus Chase Sherman. Cortez Acosta moving to 9-0. Fantastic performance from him. He put Chase Sherman in his paces. Chase Sherman, big respect for the chin that he showed, the strength and the resilience that he showed, not to wilt and to be finished. He carried on. But Waldo's, had a fantastic start to his UFC, tenure. He had a fantastic win, of course, against Jared Van Der Arg in October. And of course, a month later, he's now doubled up against Chase Sherman. So a fantastic 2-fight run through him since, obviously, he got signed through the Contender Series. The fight of the night was, of course, Muslim Salikov against Andre Fialho. Fialho getting that first round. Salikov coming out as second. And controlling and dominating that round, and then he just grew in the third round and got the finish against Andre Fialho. Of course, Fialho making his 5th appearance in the octagon this year. Salikov looked great. They both looked, again, it was fight of the night for a reason. Both of them brought the very best on the night, and it was of course Salikov. He got his arm raised and rightly so, of course. Putting that loss against Jingliang Li, of course, behind him. Earlier this year, he's back on the winning column and looking up through the welterweight division. Andre Fialho, of course, 16-6. Now he's going to be, even though he's 2-3 this year, he's going to be someone the UFC have that respect for, similar to like a Donald Cerrone, because he is able to turn up when they want, pretty much, and they like fighters who are willing to put their hand up at every opportunity and occasion, and are active as well. The active fighters, whether they're winning or losing. Look at Kevin Holland, Jacqueline Buckley at points. Most recently, they get rewarded for their ability to turn up. But he's gonna be looking behind him. You've got the likes of Ian Gary coming up. You've got Brian Barberena in there. It's a really good pot of fighters outside of that. Outside of those rankings, and of course we'll talk about Jack Della JDM, Jack Della Maddalena, of course. That last part of his name, a real tongue twister sometimes. Of course, he had a fantastic win also. And just outside of that top 15, the Robbie Lawlers of this world, the Moraleses of this world, there's a real pot of talent coming through and crop of young talent coming through as well in this welterweight division. And it's fantastic to see. Of course, as we mentioned, JDM finished Danny Roberts. Of course, Danny Roberts on the end of a bad knockout. Really, Jack Della Maddalena was just too much for him, overpowered him, and gave Danny Roberts absolutely no room to really progress. Obviously, Jack Della Maddalena, of course, 13-2. He's only had 2 professional losses and a right at the start of his career. Since he's been on a 13-fight win streak now, and it's been phenomenal to see. And He's on a 3-5 finish streak also in those 3 wins against very good opponents. And he looked fantastic again against Danny Roberts, who now moves to 18-7. Sad to see from the UK MMA point aside, but again, losses to Francisco Trinaldo and Jack Della Maddalena. Not the worst losses to have in your record, but it's showing where he is at this point in his career. Someone who's just outside of that top 15, maybe that top 20, top 25 spot is maybe his peak, especially at 35 years of age. But again, similarly to what we mentioned before about Fialho, he turns up, he's active, and he brings you good moments, whether he's on the winning side or the losing side. And the UFC, I believe, commends someone who does that, who steps in often. Obviously, Charles Johnson beat Zhalgas Zhumagulov by a split decision. Jennifer Maia beat Marina Moroz by unanimous decision. Good performance from Jennifer Maia, of course, the former title challenger. Similarly, going into this one, you've got Marina Moroz, and you're looking at maybe we're seeing a replica maybe of Manon Fiorot against Katlyn Chookagian, where you got that former challenger, maybe not on the way out or the way down, but you got fresh blood coming in there. And I do feel that this division is slowly getting closer. How close they are to Valentina Shevchenko, I don't know, but the number 1 to number 15 are certainly developing and growing, and the cream's rising to the top in this division. You've got Manon, you've got Casey O'Neill coming up, you've got the likes of Alexa Grasso, Macy Barber still developing very well. Obviously got the former challengers in Jennifer Maia and Chookagian and Jessica Andrade in that division, Lauren Murphy also. So it's getting better and it's growing and developing as a division. We saw it with the light heavyweight division towards the end of John Jones's reign. They were slowly catching up John Jones, and obviously once he vacated the belt, the division almost came to free fall. Obviously we've had Jan Blachowicz, Glover Teixeira, Yuri Prohaska champion now since that, and it's been phenomenal. I think not in an ideal world, but I think Amanda Nunes probably has 2 years left in her, especially with the lack of competition at 145. There's probably only, obviously got Norma Dumont and Chelsea Chandler there, but I'd have them as pretty big underdogs going in there with Nunes. Obviously you've got the potential Cyborg rematch, but that's not going to happen with the differences in the organisation. And Kayla Harrison's the only one that's a real viable option, but obviously she has got a multi-year deal with, of course, PFL. I think PFL are probably looking to, make that fight with Chris Cyborg, and PFL and Bellator have a bit of a crossover. I can see that happening within the next 12 to 18 months, especially with the new pay-per-view model that PFL going down. Again, similarly with Chris Cyborg, she's looking into boxing because she doesn't really have that level of talent to really, competitively match up against her. Of course, we've got the likes of Leah McCourt, Sinead Kavanagh, Janae Hardin. They're all very good competitors, and similarly to the UFC flyweight title division. As a collective, they're very close together, but the champion's just a step or two ahead of them. So going back to UFC, I think Nunes retires within 2 years, and we see probably Valentina Shevchenko either move up or maybe even retire herself in the next 2-3 years. She could definitely move up and maybe go for champ, and then vacate that 125-pound belt. And once that belt's vacated, it could be very much like a hot potato, or a lot of fresh blood. Maybe Thoreau being the first IMF champion, maybe the likes of Casey O'Neill at that point, Alexa Grasso, Jessica Andrade perhaps, and maybe we're looking at strawweight champions maybe moving up also. We'll see where the landscape is, but a good performance from Jennifer Maia to sort of nail down that she is a legit top 10, and looking to rebuild to maybe get a title shot with 2 or 3 wins under her belt. But again, for Moroz, it was a good experience. Obviously, she is 31 years of age, but she's coming in with a 3-fight win streak, and of course, it was a big step up for her. She's had a lot of council bouts in the last 2 years also. So a lot of activity where, she's had since 2018, she's had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 council fights. So a lot of times she could have been stepping in there, and has sadly missed out, only fighting on 4 occasions since 2018. So definitely not ideal for her. But yeah, good to see her back in the cage. Good to see Jennifer Maia back in the win column. And of course, you got Miles John against Vince Morales. John's getting the unanimous decision win. Split decision win for Ricky Tertius, so got back into the win column against Kevin Natividad. Vanessa Demopoulos pardon my Greek pronunciation there, against Maria Oliveira. She got the win by unanimous decision. Jumped in the arms of Michael Bisping, actually did with Joe Rogan. Good performance from her. Brady Highstand, who was actually Tercios's opponent in the tough finale. He got a win against Thorny Garcia by unanimous decision. And Natalia Silva got the knockout, definitely of the night, with a spinning back kick against Teresa Bleda in the opening fight. But UFC for me, again, we watch the UFC week in and week out. It's become a lot of our homes, but it wasn't the best card of the night. It was, some of these Apex cards are good because they allowed that more unknown talent, that the more prospect side of the UFC to really establish themselves, get some highlight reels, get some moments on camera, get some good sound bites on the interviews, and of course, like Natalia did on Saturday, she walked away with $50,000, and that's something for someone in her sort of position at the moment will be potentially life changing, if not definitely life changing, and she certainly deserved it, and it just gives her that capability because obviously with the pay-per-views, they're very heavily stacked with name value, and usually the names tend to take those spots. So these cards still have a place, especially in my opinion, because the UFC roster is so big. I think you could potentially have maybe not a contender series, but a midweek card of 5 fights, 6 fights, maybe not a deep card on a Wednesday evening, maybe, and you let these unranked prospects get some activity here. Those that want to fight 4 or 5 times a year, that are used to fighting 5 times a year in the amateur scene, well, or if not more. You're fighting 4 or 5 times a year if you're fighting at IMMAF World Champions. So yeah, I think we could maybe look into a Wednesday card at the Apex. I'd be down for that. When the Contender Series and the Ultimate Fighter isn't taking place, of course. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below on that. Also, make sure to hit that follow button, of course, and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and follow us at CageChat MMA across socials. Now, let's talk about Bellator. Bellator, for me, probably won the weekend. If you look at the competitors, obviously the big 3 this weekend. We had the LFA go and KSW, I believe, and of course one had shows this weekend. But predominantly I watched Bellator, Cage Warriors, and UFC, and Bellator put on a good show for me. Now, I have some issues with Bellator, with the product, but Vadim Nemkov versus Corey Anderson was a good fight. Nemkov, he really learned from that previous appearance with Corey Anderson. Of course, I feel sorry for Corey Anderson a little bit because that first fight he was dominating, but the clash of heads meant it was a no contest. Nemkov, of course, on the night wasn't at his best. Didn't have a full camp, I believe, going into that one, but obviously this weekend just gone, he was able to get a full camp in, and he was just too much for Corey Anderson. It was a step ahead at all points to Corey Anderson. I think Corey Anderson went something like 0-13 on takedowns, which is unlike him, and it just shows you where Nemkov really, his game plan was spotless and to the T. He got everything right on the night, and he rightfully got his hand raised and won that $1 million prize from the light heavyweight Grand Prix. He is up against Yoel Romero next. It's going to be interesting to see Romero. That fight takes place in Dublin also. But it's going to be interesting to see how he does against Yoel Romero. But Nemkov is fantastic to watch, as is Usman Nurmagomedov. Now, Usman Nurmagomedov stole the show at the weekend, in my opinion. Moving up 16-0 with a win against Patricky Pitbull, taking the belt back to Team Khabib, meaning now that they own both the lightweight and the lightweight divisions in both the UFC and Bellator. And it was a really impressive performance. Of course, Usman Nurmagomedov, 24 years of age. And when you think of the name Nurmagomedov, and when you think of the name Team Khabib, you think of the wrestling and the grappling. But this kid, well, he's not really a kid. He's fantastic to watch, both on the feet, with the striking, the kicking that he has. He has a fantastic range of kicking and striking, but he can also mix it up with the grappling, and Patricky Pitbull found that out the hard way. Again, similar to Nemkov, Usman Nurmagomedov was a step, probably 2 steps ahead, really, and it showed on some of the cards that were produced. And Usman Nurmagomedov just, showed he was in a different level to Pitbull. He dominated the fight in every aspect, and he was able to cruise to a unanimous decision victory. The only thing that he missed out on really was the actual The actual finish, a finish would have nailed on that performance for him. But again, he is new. He looked fantastic. Of course, there is the lightweight Grand Prix next year, I believe. But I think he'd be heavy favourite going into that also. Um, I was gonna say if they sign an Eddie Alvarez or something like that, Eddie Alvarez could return. But again, I'd expect Usman Nurmagomedov to beat him at the moment from what I saw on Saturday night. Also on 288, we saw Daniel James coming against Tyrell Fortune. Now, Tyrell Fortune was the 5th ranked heavyweight in the world, or in the Bellator organization, and Daniel James came in and got a finish. Now, by all means, narrative and story of Daniel James coming in, obviously, he hadn't fought in a long time in Bellator at least, but he'd come back on short notice, I believe. He'd been fighting at ACA prior to that. His last fight in Bellator was, in fact, of course, in 2014 against Eric Correa. But he came back and he finished Tyrell Fortune. I didn't agree with the finish. I think sometimes you can get overwhelmed with the finish and the sequence that the finish comes in. But I thought there was a lot of strikes to the back of the head. There was a lot of elbows to the back of the head that I think the referee could have come in and maybe stopped it. Maybe made it a no contest, perhaps. It was one of those ones you look at and you go, on the night, it wasn't a great watch. Seeing how that finish went out, I feel sorry for Tyrell Fortune. And I think, it should have been a DQ, if not definitely a no contest, just because of the number of strikes to the back of the head. But beautiful uppercut to get it there. And he was a little bit of a step ahead, to use that cliche. But in my opinion, it should have been a no contest. Trying to think if there was any. I think that was the biggest talking point from there. So let's move on to Cage Warriors. Of course, Cage Warriors, they've been fantastic. They've given us 3 events in 3 weeks. We've got one more at the end of the year. And of course, we head into 2023 with their announced schedule of San Diego to London, Manchester and Dublin. So they're putting on fantastic shows next year already. And we'll talk about that in a little bit also. But George Hardwick came out against Chris Bungard. Of course, this one was at the BT Sports Studios, was unplugged. So a lack of audience, similar to the Apex cards. A select few VIPs there, let's say, and teammates, etc., and family, I suppose, would be the case. And George Hardwick came out against Chris Bungard. Now, this fight was made only 2 or 3 weeks ago, I believe. It was on very short notice, maybe 4 weeks tops, because George Hardwick has been active recently. He last fought in July, actually. So 4 months ago against Kyle Driscoll, of course, which was fantastic. He looked fantastic in that fight, and he looked fantastic on Sunday against Chris Bungard. He looked, again, some beautiful body punches. He's got a real body hook to him, and he just took the wind out of Chris Bungard's sails with his striking, and it was a fantastic performance from the kid. Of course, he's the 155-pound champion, and performances like that, finishes like that, do get you that call up from the UFC. Now, I don't know if he gets that call up next, and in my opinion, selfishly, I don't want him to, and we'll get into that reason why very soon. But he looked fantastic, and he's doing Middlesbrough very proud, as is his brother Harry Hardwick. Of course, the Hardwick brothers taking over the Cage Warriors scene at the moment. We had the Thicklap brothers, although they're coming off a bit of they've had a hiccup in their journeys with Mikhail getting that first UFC call up and losing on that show. And of course, Machus losing to Jimmy Warhead in the interim welterweight title fight the week prior to this one, or maybe 2 weeks prior to this one, in fact. But yes, good performance from him, as it was from Morgan Sharia. Now, Morgan Sharia has been on the end of some unfortunate scorecards. He lost to Paul Hughes via majority decision, and he lost his belt to Jordan Vucenic via split decision. Going into that fight with Jordan Vucenic, it was more or less a win, and you're in the UFC. And unfortunately, he went off the back of 2 losses to that. But he came back with a good win against Daniel Bazant, and he looked good. He looked fresh. He looked obviously taken a year out since that Paul Hughes fight, and he looked rejuvenated. I felt sorry for him because, again, the crowd that he brings, the Last Pirate brings, the French fans are absolutely phenomenal. closely on par with the Irish, I'd say. It's particularly for Morgan Sharia. He has that sort of cult following around him, which I thought the UFC would have picked up by now, especially going to Paris this year. I thought they would have picked up on that, but if they return to Europe, and particularly France next year, I'd imagine Morgan Sharia is going to be there. And, he's a fantastic fighter to watch. He's a fan favourite, and it's good to see him back in the win column because he is. I believe there's a triangle at the moment in Cage Warriors. You've got Morgan Sharia, Paul Hughes, and Jordan Vucenic as almost like the three kings of the featherweight division. And of course, Vucenic's beaten them both. Paul Hughes has beaten them both. In the vice versa, it's just Morgan Sharia. But no fault of his own. It's just been in close decisions with them, and it'd be interesting to see what happens next when you got Samuel Bark there. It'd be a potential to see what's next for Morgan Sharia. Samuel Bark obviously coming off that fantastic win against Manny Akpan at 146, and of course we had Will Curry, who looked fantastic against Mikhail Shamu. Pardon me if I butchered his name. Will Curry getting knocked down in the first round with Shamu's power. Absolutely phenomenal power. But Will Curry coming out on top of that one, getting a good mount and phenomenal ground and pound. Moving him up to 9-2. Of course, his only losses in his career are to the champion, Christian Leroy Duncan. So he's certainly laying claim to a potential title shot. If not, he's definitely one away from a title shot in the 185-pound division. And it was beautiful to see the respect afterwards. There's a little bit of competitive rivalry. I think Curry had previously beaten a friend of Chamui's. And, post-fight, you never know how it's going to go. But those two showed a lot of respect. And Will Curry almost saying, can we train and can we develop each other? Because, again, Chamui's got the power. And I think Will Curry, is a very bright developing prospect. And those two could be a formidable team together. Maybe little Cage Warriors Smash Bros on the way. Jan Quayhagen's flying knee, Derek Da Silva, fantastic knockout on the night. Omran Shaban looked fantastic against George McManus. George McManus fallen into 3-4. I feel sorry for McManus again. He looks in a spot now where, again, he brings it with Cage Warriors. When you see McManus on the card, you're going to tune in, but he's 1-3. At the moment, lost to Ian Gary, of course, who's now in the UFC, lost to Oban Elliott and Omran Shaban. So he's lost to very good competitors. But it looks like, the Hangman just needs maybe some time out. But, he's a fantastic fighter to watch because you know what you're going to get with him. You're going to get a war. And it shows his resilience, his toughness to pursue. But again, it'd be interesting to see where he goes next and what he does next. Matthew Bonner, back at 185, looked fantastic, getting a ground and pound finish against Alan Carlos in round 2. Matthew Byfield finished again in the second round. Daniel Ladero. Asllani getting a standing knockout against Adam Darby in the first round, only 20 seconds in. The first punch he threw and landed. Adam Darby was the fight was called off. Adam Darby not seeming to be fit to continue. He did have a little bit of a rebuttal with the referee, but again, it was a good stoppage because he wasn't defending himself. He was almost frozen in his tracks for a while, so he wouldn't have been able to intelligently defend himself. So a good stoppage in my opinion. And Milton Alfonso Cabral did head kick Paddy Wilkinson, so a fantastic one to open up the card. Of course, we did lose Sam Creasy. This is schedule hack, but that's going to be taking place now on the New Year's Eve card, which is shaping up pretty nicely as well. Team Europe versus Team USA with the flyweight title on top of it. Big fan of that. Big fan of what Cage Warriors do. And, we're going to go... Actually, we'll leave... I'm going to do a separate video with the fights I want to see in 2023 for Cage Warriors with the cards that they announced or the destinations that they announced. But there's some big fights coming up with Cage Warriors. And, again, they're doing all the right things. I see what Bellator are doing, and Bellator are not unanimous or self-claiming that they're second, but there's a sort of mutual agreement that they're second or third best organization in the pyramid that the organizations are in. They're in there with the 1FCs and the UFCs. But their product is very poor sometimes. I'm not a big fan of the commentary team. That's just a personal thing. Some of the fights don't really make too much sense. Some of the cards don't make too much sense. Similar, with Bellator Dublin that's taking place. You would expect a Peter Keeley or someone of that nature. James Gallagher, of course, is going through some injuries at the moment, but you'd expect that sort of nature on the card. A Nemkov versus Yoel Romero. While Yoel Romero is a big, had a big reception when he fought there last October, I believe it was. You want to see some hometown heroes on that, and Dublin's been fantastic with Bellator. They've had an array of talent. They had Sinead Kavanagh versus Labour Court, I believe, back in February, which was a fantastic fight. And the 3 Arena is a good spot for Bellator to be having, and it's going to be interesting to see how that sells. They changed the date also, which is not great, with little notice, if any notice. So that's not going to get fans on board either when they paid for the hotels on the 24th, and the fight's now taking place on the 25th. I saw that being mentioned with a lot of the guys from Cythera MMA, so make sure to go check them out, of course. But it's interesting. It's interesting because Cage Warriors, in my opinion, if the UFC Cage Warriors, let's say we had UFC Cage Warriors, Bellator, and PFL on at the same time, UFC obviously gets the big screen, Cage Warriors probably gets the tablet or the computer, and Bellator and PFL probably push it aside. I'd put PFL above Bellator, in fact, and I'd probably just catch up on Tapology and see what happened in Bellator. I don't like the product of Bellator. I like some of the fights they do. I like the MMA Grand Prix that they do. I think that's their sort of avenue, their sort of USP is doing those Grand Prix. And if I was them, I'd be looking at PFL and doing maybe a 24-month Grand Prix in every division or something like that. Maybe they obviously got a lot more depth than the PFL has. So I think it'd be too harsh to do it within a year. But 24 months, we have a Grand Prix, let's say, in every division, or 2 or 3 divisions at least. That'd be my direction of going. But Cage Warriors are doing everything right. They're giving us fantastic fights. The pacing of the cards are brilliant. As soon as pretty much one fight finishes, they're wheeling the other 2 in to the next fight. It's fantastic. Obviously, you're seeing the best of the European scene and region, and you're seeing the guys of the future. Of course, they've got their own sort of. They could do with rankings. They could do with women's divisions, in my opinion. I think obviously they had the likes of Molly McCann and Corey McKenna come through. But I'd like to see the development of that side, and also the 205-pound and heavyweight divisions are quite lackluster at Cage Warriors. So again, they have got their improvements to make, but when you sit down to watch a Cage Warriors card on UFC Fight Pass, you're in for a good night. The Trilogy series was phenomenal. I wish they'd bring those back for one or 2 times a year next year, but that's unlikely. But yeah, they actually smashed it out of the park with Unplugged as well. And I think that moves on nicely to talk about PFL. Of course, the ones we're looking out for, of course, are Brendan Loughnane and Stevie Ray. Brendan Loughnane fighting for that $1 million prize tomorrow against Bubba Jenkins. Those 2 seemingly good friends and good I was going to say colleagues, but they've got mutual respect for each other. But I do expect Brendan Loughnane to get out there and get the victory. He's not had the best of years in terms of comparison to last year when he was getting finishes, finished top of the group. This year, of course, he got a decision, the majority decision against Hudo. Of course, Huskich was a late replacement for Boston Salmon. Of course, he got the unanimous decision against there. And of course, he got the unanimous decision against Chris Wade. So he's had a lot of time in the cage. And this is where PFL becomes very interesting, because obviously you're fighting very regularly. And sometimes, is it best to blitz for your opponents, or is it best to get that experience, sort of get that momentum on your side with the decision wins? And he looked fantastic against Chris Wade. It was one of his best performances that I've seen of his. And he was a step above Chris Wade on the night. Obviously, he was in London. I believe he was co-main evented, not main event. I think Kayla Harrison was also on that card. And the crowd was really on his side. He looked fantastic. And of course, Bubba Jenkins also fought on that card, getting the finish against Kudo, getting the submission in round 1. And this is going to be a fantastic matchup for me. We know what Brendan Loughnane can bring. He's been out in Thailand for the whole camp, training at Tiger Muay Thai, I believe. So he's just been grinding out, training with Darren Till and the likes. And I think he's ready to get that prize and get that belt wrapped around his waist. And of course, we had Leon Edwards in the UFC earlier this year. It'd be fantastic to have Brendan Loughnane also pick up gold this year. Of course, in the lightweight division, you've got Stevie Ray against Olivier Aubin-Mercier. He's already defeated former one UFC veteran in Anthony Pettis to finish him. Beat him twice, finished him in the first fight, and obviously went the distance in the second one. Obviously, Olivier Aubin-Mercier has been very good himself. Of course, I believe he signed last year, but he had some injury problems, so he never really got going. But he came back this year, and he's been very good. He's on a 3-fight win streak. Again, similar to Brendan Loughnane, he's been the distance in all three of those. Nathan Schultz, Raush Manito, I believe, won the title last year, and Alex Martinez. So again, he's been on a very hot streak himself. Of course, you've got the third fight, I believe, in Kayla Harrison and Larissa Pacheco. Of course, these two are the best that the PFL would call in that 155-pound division. Again, you expect Kayla Harrison to get the victory, 15-0. She's just too good for the rest of this lightweight division. Unfortunately, she's got too much, and it showed when she went to Invicta and they allowed her elbows in that one. And now she brutalized her opponent on there. Obviously, in PFL, there is no elbows, but she's incredible to watch. It'd be interesting to see what they do with her with this pay-per-view model. Again, I think signs and directions saying Chris Cyborg and Bellator sort of crossover with PFL. With that multi-deal, of course, there was a lot of talk last year with her contract being up. Could she go to the UFC? Could she go to Bellator and fight Chris Cyborg just on that platform and that within that organization? But obviously she signed a multi-year deal. So it's gonna be interesting to see what happens with Kayla Harrison and potentially the 145-pound division. Because obviously you've got Julia Budd and Aspen Ladd on this card. Could you maybe bring some of the 155ers down to the 145-pound division and make a division there and a league within that division rather than at 165 maybe, or split the two up? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what happens there. But yeah, Julia Budd, as I said, again, coming up against Aspen Ladd, who's making a PFL debut since being released by the UFC, of course, earlier this year. Be interesting to see how she does at 145 and against the former Bellator champion in Julia Budd. Delano Taylor versus Sadibou C is the 170-pound tournament fight, of course. And you got Rob Wilkinson against Amari Akhmedov in the light heavyweight title fight as well. So, of course, you got 6 title fights. And let's not forget Ante Delija versus Mateus Chafel in the heavyweight title battle also. Marlon Moraes makes his PFL debut, this time not against Shane Burgos as scheduled, but against Shane Moraes. With an all-Brazilian affair going down in the 145-pound division, I believe. It says 135 on Tapology, but I believe this is a 145-pound fight. Nathan Short against James Stevens, that's going to be a good fight. And then the list, undefeated Dakota Teixeira, of course, fighting out in Manchester. It's going to be fantastic. 6-0, she had a fantastic debut. She comes against 2-0 Catherine Corrigenes. Pardon me if I butchered that name again. And we've got the grandson of Muhammad Ali, Biagio Ali Walsh, coming in against Tom Gracer. Ali Walsh 1-on-1, of course. You've got Nico Ali Walsh doing his thing in boxing, and Biagio is coming in and doing his thing in the PFL, in the MMA. And it's a really good card. It's a fantastic card, really. Of course, in the US, I feel sorry for you a little bit because this one has just been announced on pay-per-view, I believe, and $50 at this moment in time. I think the card's worthy of it, but I think the PFL have made that wrong decision with it being their first pay-per-view. I think if you went around the $25, $30 route, it'd be interesting. Obviously, the draw is there with Kayla Harrison, Brendan Loughnane. There are some draws there, but it's not quite a $50 draw, in my opinion. Obviously, in the UK, it's on Channel 4 for the last time until it goes over to the Zone next year, of course. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be a good night. Again, as we mentioned with Cage Warriors, they're pacing. PFL need to take a note out of Cage Warriors, but because the pacing at the PFL is horrendous, it takes about 7 hours to get through a card, and unfortunately, we just don't have the time for that, especially in the UK, when you're up till 3 or 4 in the morning. The last thing you do want to do is be waiting 5 minutes for ad reads and promotional VETs, etc., when you could just get on with the fights. So yeah, they need to take a look at Cage Warriors books. But yes, I'm going to leave it there, guys. Of course, no UFC this weekend. We get a break, of course. Next week, go to Kevin Holland versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. But yes, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Make sure to hit follow. If you're watching on Facebook, make sure to go follow us on socials at CageChat MMA across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And I'll see you guys on the next video.